father was the president of the Board of Education, and so people, this is what I was expecting and always was surrounded by. Certainly I lived in a neighborhood, in a community where black people were very prominent, you know, the teachers and the lawyers and the principals and the doctors, and so this is what I was very accustomed to. Then after I graduated from Michigan State, I went on to do my graduate work in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you know this, but they call Washington, D.C. Chocolate City. So that just tells you that, I mean, there was a complete layer of socialization and no matter what class, lower class, upper class, middle class, working class, of African Americans who were very prominent and very involved. So, you know, I was accustomed to that. Then I moved to New York. There was more of the same, even though it was a lot more diversity and more widely spread. And then I moved to Toledo and still continuing that tradition of being surrounded by and being in communities where African Americans were very involved and prominent and substantially engaged in the society, the culture, the politics, the everything. I tell people that my mother worked for the United Auto Workers, and she was, here in Michigan, you somehow were involved in the auto industry some way. So my mother worked for the Solidarity House, which was the international UAW. I can remember as a child, I couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 or maybe even younger than that. She always had us at the polling places. We were always passing out flyers. We were just involved in so many ways. I was the youngest Kennedy girl in 1960. And so that was just my experience, and that was my knowledge base. And then when I came to Arizona, that all changed. I moved to Glendale, and in at least a 4-mile radius, there was nobody who looked like me. Okay? I would go into my local Fry's, which was on 43rd and Northern. I never saw another black person. The only thing that was familiar to me in that Fry's was the fact that they had to know something about Michigan because they had Berner's ginger ale. And to this day, you can still get Berner's ginger ale there, okay? And, you know, if I would incidentally or every now and then run into another African American, we would literally hug. We were so happy to see, where do you get your hair done and where do you do? So, I mean, it was those moments that were just, you know, a pleasure to my life. And then I had other family who lived here already. Yes, ma'am.
What year did you move to Arizona?
99.
Okay, thank you.
And my soon after, my cousin, my first cousin, as a matter of fact, who had been living here for a while and had, she graduated and her children graduated from what's the school? Not Southern. What is it?
South Mountain.
Yeah, was it South Mountain High School?
Yeah.
Okay, so she graduated from South Mountain High School and she lived in the South Side of all of this. And she said, come on, let's go to the Celebrity Theater. And we went to see the Kings of Comedy. And I spent more time looking around. It's like, oh, wow! I had no idea there was that many black folks in Arizona, let alone, I was just thrilled. And so what that told me was, if I, supposedly educated, was unaware of the prominence and the existence and of African Americans in Arizona, I couldn't even imagine what my students were thinking. And so I volunteered to do this project because I felt like they needed to know about Arizona. They needed to know about African Americans in Arizona. They needed to know what they had accomplished, what their social, cultural, political, artistic engagement had been over years. And as I went on, then I found out, well, because you do know that most folks don't know even today that Arizona was a cotton a place where they produce cotton. Okay, so even now I will say to people, I was like, well, where do you think Goodyear, where do you think the name of that city came, that town came from? Now, I don't know. I said, okay, Goodyear tires. They'll go, okay. And then I said, tires are made from rubber and cotton. Okay. And they would go, oh, okay. But they still didn't get it that black folks came here to pick cotton. And I mean, from the 20s and on, black folks came here. They migrated here from Oklahoma, from Texas, from all of these places where there was cotton that we knew about, and we came here to pick cotton. And so it's like, okay, folks need to know this. I need to share this. Then, so I started this project, and in fact, one of the people that I interviewed was Matthew Whitaker, and Matthew Whitaker was a native Phoenician. And when he went to Arizona State for undergraduate school, he wanted to write a paper about blacks in Arizona. He could only find one book, only one reference. And at the time that was, Richard Wright, no, I'm sorry, not Richard Wright, Richard E. Harris, and the name of the book was The First 100 Years, A History of Arizona Blacks, okay? And that was written in 1983, and it is now out of print. So I was like, that's really a problem, because I realized that I could count on one hand, maybe two, the books that were written about African Americans in this area. And so there was one that's written by a woman at University of Arizona, and it was on cotton picking, okay? And then there was not very much else. Now, since that time, Matthew has written a book called Race Work, where he focused on one particular family in Arizona, but not given the full exposure of what had been going on and how it had transpired. So eventually, hopefully within the year, my book will be out on pioneers. And I'm calling it By the Time They Came to Phoenix. Okay, so it's African American pioneers in Arizona. So, as I said, I have had an opportunity to interview some amazing people. The first person that I interviewed was Dr. Eugene Grigsby. And Dr. Grigsby was the first art historian professor at ASU. Okay. And he was really a contemporary of the Harlem Renaissance. So many of his friends were Harlem Renaissance writers and artists that influenced him, and his work has been it's international in scope. And so I first interviewed him. Now, you're going to hear his voice, you're going to hear and see him. I should admit, because this was my first interview, his interview, the interview that I did with him is the one that I use with my oral history students to teach them what not to do. Because I grew up as a communicator, and I think I'm a pretty decent communicator, but you never let people just talk and you don't give them any kind of response. You have eye contact, but you go, what, really? So you'll hear me doing this in this interview. I since learned, oh, no, don't do that. Okay, so I will let them know in advance. Okay, I'm just going to nod my head or make funny faces, but I'm not going to say anything because we don't want to have me on the video. But that's what I did for the first one. You'll find that a number of the interviews that I've done, for different reasons, I approached them differently. So, for example, there's one that I did with Mrs. Esther McElroy, who is now deceased. Both she and Dr. Grigsby are deceased now. She had Alzheimer's at the time. She was in her 80s and she had Alzheimer's, but she wanted to do the interview with me. And so you'll see that I helped her out a little bit, and the part of the helping her out was her son sometimes spoke for her and filled in some of the gaps that she was unable to, but you still get her personality and her passion as a teacher. So I have I'm going to share some voices with you. I want to let them tell their stories, because them telling their stories is much more enjoyable than listening to me retell their stories, though I will retell some of them. And you'll find that the people who I share, this is a rough draft of a later piece that I'm going to do, but I cobbled together some of the documentaries that I have done over the years, just taking bits and pieces. I'm not a videographer, so I didn't do a really great job in terms of a clean fit. I will get to that, but it's good enough that I think you can really get a feel for these people. So this is by the time we get to Phoenix. So it's just a couple of moments just without sound, because I have to give recognition to the Arizona Humanities. This is a list of some of the people that I've done interviews with over the years. My last 3 people were not on there. Uh-oh. We heard sound a moment ago. You have the speaker plugged in? I mean, is there an additional? Okay.
No, we have it going.
But from the, there you go. Okay.
Really?
Me.
So,
Is that loud enough? No.
no, I don't want any parts of it. Then I applied at Johnson C. Smith in Alabama State. I could have had a position in either one. But Robinson sent a contract. He wasn't going to take no for it. His contract was for $2,800 a year.
Wow.
Twice what they offered me at Smith.
Yeah. Wow.
They offered $1,400 to Smith. And so we looked at that. So we go to Phoenix. I feel proud of this cola.
Okay. So were you instrumental in finding that?
Yes.
Really?
It's so embarrassing to be telling this man all of the things he did, and I'm saying good. Like I gave him permission.
Okay. Okay, good.
And I was president of the Arizona Education Association at one time. And we were having a Four Corners conference of art teachers from the 4 states. And I was chairing that conference, and I asked one of the members to ask the Hurd Museum if they would host a reception for those coming in. She came back and said that the director said he hosted, but we couldn't afford it. What they would charge. So I knew the director. I went to him and asked Mike Fox, Mike, good PR for the museum and so forth, and you could do it in the state. He would host this. So he said he would do it on a condition. If I would do it, do it after an hour. So I said, well, I'd do that if we can get the community involved in it. I want the black community involved.
Okay.
And so he agreed. And I agreed to do the exhibit. It didn't turn out to be as big as I had originally hoped, but it was a major exhibit. But I wrote to a number of organizations and individuals telling them what we wanted to do. And I think I said, asked for a contribution of $250 each. I must have written about 30 or 40, but I think about 10 or 15 responded. And what we did, we had them make banners tenure,
Mm-hmm.
and they tied it in with that.
Okay.
And we brought in, we got brought in African scholars from across the country, but also our main speaker came from Scotland. He had his book on African art was one of the most widely used by scholars around the country. I can't think of his name right now, but anyway, and it's just titled African art.
Mm-hmm.
Then we brought several scholars from Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
We brought in Jeff Donaldson from Washington,
Okay.
Rosalind Walter, who's now here with African Art Museum in Smithsonian,
Uh-huh.
and a number of other people like that for the symposium.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Babatunde,
Oh, sure. Definitely.
we brought Babatunde here.
Okay.
We didn't bring him. You know, him, his wife, or his ex.
His ex-wife, yes. Uh-huh.
Then we brought Oliver Fire
Uh-huh.
from Nigeria.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Wow. Now, what year was this?
1985.
Oh, okay.
But
My mother did not drive, and she had to make she made home visits, and I would go with her and take my books and do my homework, and then after a visit to a home, she would come out and say, "Betty, we must get some food for these people," and we would go then and purchase food, or she'd say, "We'll have to come back and bring some clothing for this family. They're in need of clothing." So that was just instilled in us to give and do, especially to those who didn't have. And that has been the way of life for my sister and me.
One practice institutionalized in Phoenix by Miss Betty Fairfax was the home visits she learned at her mother's skirt tails. I asked her to tell about one of her memorable home visits.
I made this home visit, knocked on the door. The gentleman answered the door, and of course there wasn't supposed to be a man in the family, but so I said, "Is Mrs. Jones here?" And he said, "Yes, come in." And I said, "Well, I'm here to see her." So he said, "Well, just a moment." He said, "Have a seat," which I did. And we went back, and I could hear him saying, call her name, and said, "There's a lady out here to see you." And she said, "Well, you tell whoever it is that I'm in bed and they'll have to come back later." So he came out and said, Miss Jones said that you'd have to come back later. I said, "Will you please go and tell Mrs. Jones that I came about 20 miles to see her, and I'll just sit here until she gets out of bed." So I just sat there and waited. She got up and came out, and we had our conference.
My name is Clarence L. Dix. I am a retired social work professor, so I have no occupation at this time. I have a vocation, which is serving others. I love that I've been an advocate and role model for family throughout my life. When I arrived at Arizona State University in Tempe, there were probably a dozen or two black African-American faculty people. And we formed an African-American Faculty Association and began to do things because, again, student unrest sort of drafted us into take a stand, go before the regents, deal with the presidency, lobby for issues that related to students and to eliminate overt racism and oppression and issues in police community relations on campus. Almost all the areas where social injustice existed in the larger society, were present on the campus at that time. And so they held us accountable to taking a stand to deal with those injustices in our community, which was the university community. It was an interesting time to be on the ASU campus. A little bit of unrest, obviously the war and all those kind of protests were over, but it was a time for social justice.
Then I ran for the city council. First time they asked me, I said, no, I don't think so. I was chairman of the LEAP Commission, Leadership Education for the Advancement of Phoenix. And I don't like to give up when I've accepted responsibility, so they ran another. About this time, the charter government had, at one time they had 5 all-white men living in a certain area. And we were pushing for diversity, ethnicity, and also gender. So they ran another African American. They brought in finally from a Hispanic and a black, Dr. Morrison Warren, who's a top-notch educator, used to sue them. They brought him on the council, and he served 4 years, two-year terms. And they decided after the end, they just quit. I designed, in my judgment, to keep a council weak because it takes you a while to learn the ropes and then to do all these kind of things. So they ran an African American attorney, and he lost in court. And then 2 years later, they asked me again, and I said, fine. And every time, Mr. Good, you can't win because you're too quiet. Mr. Good, you're African American, and the population is only 5%. And we were running citywide. I said, well, we'll see. They raised some money. We raised some campaign in the South Phoenix area. And they raised some money. Anyway, I got elected. Along with Margaret T. Hance, who later became mayor of this city. We went on at the same time. Well, all in all, I had 11 elections, 2-year terms, 22 years.
When I first moved here in the 80s, I'll be honest with you, I thought Phoenix was a very, very unusual place because a lot of what we had dealt with in the East was already resolved, at least we thought, and then you come here and you see things like, the Confederate flag flying, and you get an opportunity to hear about the fact that people aren't organized in the workforce, and the kinds of issues that we've experienced. I don't know if you ever quite get used to it. You just use what you have to work with to try to make an impact and to make a difference. I was afforded the opportunity to be very creative and to implement some things that were pretty much unheard of. We were working to bring, I remember it's called Jazz in Arizona. I had full-blown band set up in the back of the facility, people with cellos and trumpets, and to expose the children of the community to jazz. I felt that I grew up around jazz. I felt that it was a huge part of the fabric of this country, and that young people needed to be exposed to that. So Jazz in Arizona was a piece of that. The South Phoenix Youth Center is still open to this day. It's an award-winning facility. We were very focused not only on providing youth education, culture. I am the granddaughter of sharecroppers from Gretna, Virginia. My grandfather was from the Coles Hill Farm Plantation.
They would bring me over to Grandma's house to keep me overnight. And she would tell about the days of slavery and how she would be in the big house and hear the men being beaten out there in the yards, in the slave quarters, and how they would yell and scream because after they had these wounds opened up by whips, then the women would take them and rub salt into those wounds to heal it so it would not fester. My bishop told me I could be whatever I wanted to be. And I believed her. And that's really just how as opposed to saying, yes, we can, I think I would say, yes, I will. I was invited to join the legal sorority. I did not know that they did not know my color. And as I got off the elevator, there was a nice little lady sitting at the desk asking could she help me. And I gave her my name. She heard it, got up and jumped up and went someplace, and she came back with someone else who advised me a mistake had been made.
This is in
But my
Chicago.
grandmother trained me, never let them see you cry. Don't let them see you cry. Don't let them, whatever come up, don't let them see you cry. And so I got back on the elevator. As Marjorie was coming up to get off the elevator, and I brushed past her, and she said, well, where are you going? Down, I said. She went down with me. And then I was able to cry. I came to Arizona kicking and screaming in 1970. No prospect of a job. Arizona did not have reciprocity with any state. I had to take the bar examination all over again. Funny thing about it was, I had traveled with Greg. I had traveled with him
talking
all
about
over
Dick
the
Gregory.
United States, lecturing on constitutional law. And at various colleges, Greg would go in first and I'd go in afterwards because of my Greg University of Chicago case. And Arizona said I didn't pass constitutional law. And I said, no, there's been a mistake. I know constitutional law. I had compared my answers with the answers of a very friendly law student who passed the bar, who happened to be Caucasian. And our answers were identical. And I thought, then Arizona's got to give me back my dignity. The Lord kept putting Arizona in my way, and that's where I was supposed to be. My mother said to my aunt, God wants you here. And sure enough, I had not been in Arizona too long before one of my Caucasian colleagues met me one day and said, June, how would you like to be a judge? I said, you got to be out of your mind. Yes, they weren't ready for a black woman lawyer. They sure not ready for a black woman judge. You got to be. Oh, whatever you smoking, stop it.
In between, if you help at least one person, then that's all that matters.
If lots more of us loved each other, we'd solve lots more problems. And man, this world would be a desert. That's where I want Fox.
Coming from East Coast or the South over to the West was kind of a migration to better their lives. African Americans could not live north of McDowell Road. So it was a law almost that you couldn't do that. All African Americans lived in South Phoenix. And so what you had was a concentration of all your teachers, doctors, lawyers, dentists, whatever, living in that area of the town. It was almost like living in an African American city because we were so confined in South Phoenix, which is off of Broadway and 24th Street. Which was actually, if you heard the old Dyke and the Blazers song down on Broadway, that's what that song is all about, Broadway in Phoenix, Arizona, and how rough and tough it was at the time. I love it, the fact that our neighborhoods were so unique and they all were so cohesive. Everybody got along really, really well, and I think that was something that's a little bit missing in today's neighborhoods. I mean, we used to have block parties, we would go in and outside of each other's homes with no problems. Everybody got along really well. It was a thing about supporting one another. Obviously, I was blessed to have parents who had some foresight to do some things. My dad being the first state senator in Arizona, he ended up in some textbooks in some of the schools and things like that. I did get some ribbing from some of the kids saying I was the senator's son, so I would get
preferential treatment and stuff.
I am from Harlem, New York. I grew up in a family of artists, musicians, singers, and it was an incredible experience growing up in New York because I had an opportunity to be exposed to so much of what I loved, from music to dance to theater. In terms of my identity, it was a Nation of Islam that really taught me fearlessness. How not to be afraid of anything. That I belonged on this planet and I had a voice and that nothing or no one can stop me from doing and being anything I want to be. It was a Nation of Islam. I will have to give that to them. They teach me to know that I'm not alone. That somebody is always there. Someone has got my back. Thank you, Nation of Islam, for teaching me to be fierce and fearless. When we were raising children, my husband and I was married, and I was in the Nation of Islam. And I wanted to get my children out of New York to raise them in what I thought was a better environment. So we came here to honor the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's wishes to build a nation. And he said that Phoenix was the perfect location because of climate, because of its proximity to California, which was supposed to fall off the planet, was the earthquake on the beachfront property. But there were lots of reasons. And it was just really kind of open territory for us to build hospitals and banks and other businesses for African American people. Things, of course, changed once I got here. A lot of us who came in from New York to build this nation, but we weren't so accepted by the sisters and brothers in the Nation of Islam, so we weren't able to build that nation that we really came here to build. So we went off in different directions and did our own nation building the only way that we knew how. The city of Phoenix has got to be one of the best employers on the planet. That was probably one of the best moves. I never thought I would ever stay in a job as long as I did. And I stayed with them for almost 30 years. And I started out in Parks and Recreation, and I was part of the special events team of 5 women. And we were the ones who actually started the Electric Light Parade. That was one of our events that actually started with us. And the Festival of Lights, that was one of our events, the Hold Down Matsuri Festival, and all of the huge festivals that the city of Phoenix did was our responsibility. I also used to do, for 13 years, the mayor's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. breakfast, which was this humongous. I actually started off with like 150 people up to, it wound up being about 13,000 people. We had it at the America West Arena. For 13 years,
Somehow
the mayor's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. breakfast, which was this humongous. I actually started off with like 150 people up to, it wound up being about 13,000 people. We had it at the America West Arena. I'm from Harlem, and I've always lived around our people. And I've gone to school, of course, with everyone. But when I came here, it was like, oh my God, where are our people? Where am I going to take my children? What are we going to do? How are we going to live here? So that aha moment was, okay, I need to do something about that. I started the Rites of Passage program because I felt the need for my daughters to have something, and my son, to have something that would align them with who they are as an African people. I've been doing that, been going on 20 years. And I have a program, of course, now for African American girls, but I did a program for about 8 or 9 years for Latinas called De Niña a Mujer. I did one for Anglo girls called Chrysalis, and that lasted maybe about a year or two. And then I had one for boys that we did for about 6 years. It was called Sankofa. Well, the Rites of Passage program is a 15-week program for a leadership and culture development program for girls 13 to 17 years old. We meet for 15 weeks. And each week, the girls are given information, insights, education on not only who they are, but who are they to become. And I'm very excited about this year because we're looking at growing or graduating or expanding the program. And hopefully within the next year or two, we'll be taking some of the girls to Africa. I tell my girls all the time that what you think about me ain't none of my business. Don't worry about what people think about you. My grandmother used to say that if people ain't saying anything talking about you, you ain't doing what you're supposed to be doing. So they gonna talk about you. So what? If they're not saying anything good, whatever, just keep moving. I have parents who come to me now who will tell me that my daughter is not getting ready to graduate from college and thank you for the Rites of Passage program because I don't think that she would have done it if she wasn't in the program. I have young women who are now engineers who are only on businesses, and they always tell me that if it wasn't for Rites of Passage, I would not be where I am today. So we've had some really good stories, some good testimonials, and some serious blessings as a result of the Rites of Passage program. So I'm very happy about it and very honored to be a part of that program and to have started it. And I started it because my own daughters, they needed something, so if I felt my daughters needed, some other people's daughters needed as well. We've been doing the Journey Home program for about 11 years now, and thank you God for Arizona State University because it's actually their baby, and they asked me to come on board to actually facilitate and do the program with two other people, Imani Muhammad and Tanika Broughton. We bring visual arts, performing arts, movement, storytelling, and creative writing to the women of Estrella Jail. We usually have about 30 or so women that we work with for about a 5 or 6 week period. We go into the jails, we're in there for about 4 or 5 hours per day. We usually go in about once or twice a week, depending on the day of the week that we're there. And at the end of that 5 to 6 week period, there is a public performance where we invite people to come into the jail and watch the women do their performances, do their writings, exhibit their art that they've created during that process. And what we have found in talking to the jail is that the recidivism rate for the women who participated is much lower. So that's a good thing.
My family background goes to Coffeyville, Kansas, which is right on the border of Kansas and Oklahoma in the southeastern part of Kansas. I was reared by my mother, a single parent, along with my maternal grandparents, and I was considered a son and a grandson because my mother and I stayed with my grandparents. I called her mother Mama, and her father, Daddy, they were my grandparents. And so they had a family of 11, and so if you count me, I was number 12. I've been in the Black Baptist Church all my life, but I really didn't have church in me until at 16, my first little girlfriend, she went to First and Union Church of God in Christ. And I heard them talking about being saved. And I just thought, once you're baptized, you join the church. That's it. And when I heard the holiness preachers talking about being saved, I realized I wasn't saved. And I gave my life to Christ. But then there was something else. It just, like that wasn't enough. So when I was 16, I asked my pastor, I said, can we have a youth Sunday once a month? And can I give a little talk, 5 minutes each time? It's okay. So the first time I gave a little 5-minute talk. The third month, I was up there to give my 5-minute talk. I said, wait a minute, I have something to say. I've been called to preach. And my grandmother was a deaconess, so she was sitting right on the front, second row. And she smiled and a tear rolled down her face. And when I went back and spoke to the pastor, he said, oh boy, I've been knowing that all the time. I was just waiting for it to come out of you. I preached my first sermon at age 17. I came here reluctantly. I was going to Union Theological Seminary in New York City. I graduated with my first Master's of Divinity. Then I was working on my Master of Sacred Theology, and I wanted to pastor New York City also. A friend of mine who was a recruiter for Union knew of some people here in this church on the pulpit committee, and he sent my name in. And to be very honest, when he sent my name in, they sent me an application, and I threw it in the trash because I said, there's no black people in Phoenix. The recruiter friend called me back and said, Warren, they said they haven't heard from you. And then I told him, I said, oh man, I must have misplaced that application, so they sent me another one. I filled it out, but ironically, because I was unmarried, 25 at the time, had never pastored, they kind of put it in file 13. A pastor they were looking for out of Newark, New Jersey, Dr. Granville Seward. I was preaching for him for their youth day. And he said, you know what? There's a church in Phoenix been trying to get me to come there to be their pastor. But I'm not going to leave Mount Zion. He said, I'm going to send them your name. One night in Cornerstone Baptist Church in Brooklyn, New York, where I was scheduled to preach, in the congregation that night was a member from First Institutional Baptist Church. And she came up, you know what we need in Phoenix? And so she went back here and said, there's a young man by the name of Warren. So my name came from 3 independent sources. And so the pulpit committee here said, well, maybe God is talking. So they took it out of file 13. Now here I am 35 years later. I'm glad God sent me here because I've been involved in the fight for justice, whether it's the Phoenix Union High School District, Roosevelt Elementary School District, or the City Council, or dealing with the governors that we've had, my involvement in the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday effort here, fighting apartheid in South Africa, establishing a church in Soweto, South Africa, being involved in building permanent homes in Haiti, urging the city council years ago to build bridges that go to South Phoenix that would not be washed out when you had the 100-year rains. I mean, all of that is part of what I call holistic Christian ministry. And by virtue of me being the pastor of First Institutional, because it was like the mother Black Baptist church. And so by me coming here, it almost made me a leader automatically, whether I want to be a leader or not. And so I'm called on today. I mean, we're trying to establish relationships between the black-brown communities where we have commonalities so we can fight on some issues, some common issues together. But we still fight racism. Still, if you walk into a room and you're the only person of color, you still have to deal with a history of stereotypes and racism that you have to overcome just because you're a person of color. Jerusalem, Jerusalem. My first trip to
where the airport is now was our property. Then we built there and then we built more.
What kind of farming did you do?
Cotton. Now, yes, I did cotton and all of that, but the hardest thing was getting things ready for the market. Now, that's the world's worst job for a mama's daughter. Pretty soon I was going to school and the kids made fun, but I made all ones, the A's now. And Miss Wells, she was the teacher, she said, don't worry. But she didn't know that we couldn't bring no poor works home. Not if we wanted to sit down to eat. And that's the way we live. Bobby?
During the time that she went to ASU, none of the blacks could eat at the cafeteria and everything. They always had to stay out on the lawn. And they were pretty much segregated completely in the college. And actually, all the grades were lowered because you were black as well. If you got an A, you automatically got a C. And it's their club, which is the Black Student Union, is called the Dunbar Club.
I used to tell them they're mine, and I did. I felt that way. When you get off of that bus, you're mine. And they call me Miss White. I said, don't call me Miss White, call me Miss Chin. Mr. Landry was upset with that. I said, but Mr. Landry. When they call me Miss White, they get all stiff. And I don't want that. I want us to be a family. One mother came, you can't tell me he's yours. I said, he's not mine by birth, but he's mine by the clock.
begin to tell the story of Dr. C.T. Wright's life? Do we begin with his humble beginnings in Social Circle, Georgia?
As a kid, growing up in Social Circle, Georgia, I grew up literally in the cotton fields. I started in the cotton fields, well, from my birth. My mother carried me to the cotton fields. Really throughout my life, I'm probably one of the few persons who actually had a master's degree and was still picking cotton. I have planted cotton, I have chopped cotton, I have picked cotton, I worked in a cotton factory and made cloth out of cotton. Therefore, I know everything about cotton, not as a professional, but as a laborer.
Perhaps we look at his record of scholarship.
I decided I had to do something. I couldn't sing, I couldn't play football, I couldn't play basketball, so I decided to start with academics. And from that point on, I took an interest in academics, and I was influenced by my 12th grade teacher. He said, you can think, delegate to the 1980 Democratic National Convention in New York City at Madison Square Garden. I had 2 appointments to commissions by the former governor of this great state, Senator Nepal Thomas. She appointed me to her commission on faith and community initiatives. I used to carry people that had prayed with the governor when she was in office.
A Republican?
Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. Whether you agree or disagree, he freed the slavery, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. All of the African Americans who were elected to Congress during the days of Reconstruction were Republicans. The vast majority of African Americans in the 1930s and 40s in this country were Republicans. We became Democrats as a majority during the Roosevelt administration and during the Kennedy administration. The civil rights law itself was really supported by Republicans. A different kind of Republican, perhaps you. It could never have passed in 64, 65 without Rockefeller, that is Senator Rockefeller from New York, and a few other very powerful Republicans. I was a Republican delegate to the National Convention in Minnesota. I'm one of the few in America, black or white, who's been a delegate to both conventions. I was a delegate in 1980 convention.
I believe that I can make it through it. Oh, I believe it's already done.
I want you to already see yourself out of the storm. The clouds will move. It's time for you to smile again. Come on, Sean. I believe the family will get better. I believe God will provide. I believe your rain is gone away. Clouds have moved. I believe you'll make it through it. Oh, I believe it's already done.
If you are as impressed with Dr. C.T. Wright as I am, then you will follow his advice.
And my challenge to all is to become active in the community wherever we can. Whether it's in a church, whether it's at a university, whether it's on the corner, wherever you can become active. One should become active.
So, as you can see, high school was the last high school that they have built here in the Phoenix area, and so they named it after Betty H. Fairfax. Well, because of my relationship with Miss Betty and Miss Jean, I worked with, in various capacities, with the Fairfax High School. I have taken teachers with me to Ghana to study with Fulbrights. I have taken speakers there. I've had all kinds of interactions, but one of the things that I was most proud of is just 2 weeks before Dr. Grigsby passed away, he wanted me to put together a group of students from Fairfax, and he was going to come to them to instruct them at Fairfax. And then when we realized, oh, he's not really able to do that. So I got a bus and I took 15 students to his studio and he instructed them. He mentored them. He talked with them about art and how important art was and how it was important for them to be engaged in the community with their art. So that was always something I was very proud of. And there are a number of opportunities that I've had over the years since I first met these people. The last person that we did the Pioneer Award with last year was Judge Cecil B. Patterson. Okay, and before that it was just to see the breadth of what I do. So did Judge, and the year before that I did probably the best known barber in the Phoenix metropolitan area. That was George Greathouse. So, and who had been a football star at ASU and just stayed here and became a barber and an architect and all kinds of things. This year it's Colleen Jennings Rokenstock, who is the executive director of Gamage Theater, and she's the vice president of cultural affairs for ASU. So I've had this wonderful, wonderful experience of talking to such a wide breadth of folks, because I wasn't always looking for who was famous. I was looking for who was out there doing the work. So several of them talked about MLK birthday celebrations or how they were involved in one way or the other. Judge Jean and Dr. Stewart were very involved in establishing this, the state for MLK Day. But it's just been such a pleasure. One of the things that I found is just looking at the different family structures. So some of them came from families of 10 or 12. Some, like Judge Jean, came from, she was the only child. And in her family, the mother was the one who dictated what you did and you didn't do. Okay? Then in other families, the mother maybe stayed at home and was the provider and their caregiver. But each of these people, one other thing that they always talked about was the necessity and the importance of education. And these are messages that I like to share with folks over and over. The interviews are archived with the ASU Digital Repository, and they are accessible, but I have kind of kept them private for the moment until I can get my book out, and then I'll make it available. But I feel like the work needs to be shared. Just because there are so many people who just don't know the ins and outs and what has gone into making Arizona what it is today. And so I'm always very happy to talk about this work, and I've been trying to find someone to take it over with the Pioneer Award and dinner, because I keep telling them, I am going to retire. And they go, But until I can't, I enjoy doing this work and I enjoy sharing it with you. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. Wasn't it great?